JeanSibelius stands forever as the greatest composer Finland has ever nurtured. After attaining unparalleled worldwide fame and artistic prestige, he withdrew into an astonishing 30-year silence in the final chapter of his life, refusing to publish any major musical composition whatsoever. This extraordinary prolonged retreat would later be remembered throughout classical music history as the silence of Järvenpää. Tonight, accompanied by the soft gentle glow of flickering hearthlight, we step into the snow-covered quiet forests of northern Europe and uncover the hidden truth concealed behind this legendary lifelong stillness. If artistic inspiration carried tangible weight then, for JeanSibelius that weight grew far too heavy to bear in his later years, becoming an unbearable burden resting upon his soul. He once took the precious long-awaited manuscript of his Eighth Symphony and cast it deliberately into the flames of his own fireplace, destroying a masterpiece the entire musical world had spent years longing to behold. What kind of sorrowful, resolute determination lay hidden behind this heart-wrenching, irreversible choice on this mild, quiet evening? Come listen closely to how this towering Nordic artistic giant resonated deeply with the soul of nature amid decades of lonely seclusion. JeanSibelius' entire life mirrors the spiritual soul and national spirit of Finland itself and represents an artist's ultimate sacred sacrifice upon the altar of artistic perfection. He spent long tranquil years living in a simple wooden cottage nestled deep within the quiet wilderness of Järvenpää. He chose a life of peaceful stillness, abstaining from public speech, abandoning further musical creation, spending his days merely listening to the whisper of wind wandering through pine boughs, watching endless snow drift silently across the frozen landscape and gazing gracefully at swans gliding across glassy lake waters. This is a soothing journey tracing the quiet themes of creative inspiration, depletion, deliberate self-exile, and gentle spiritual return, dedicated to every lonely wandering soul keeping watch deep into the quiet night. Imagine encountering a legendary master standing firmly at the absolute peak of artistic reverence, honored as a national divine icon by his entire nation, who one day simply lays down his writing instrument, forever choosing never to utter another musical note to the outside world. He dwells in quiet seclusion inside a remote wooden cottage hidden deep within the forest for 30 full years, while the whole world waits eagerly day after day for new masterpieces to emerge. Yet he sits calmly beside his window, watching flocks of elegant swans soar gracefully across the quiet lake surface. The man who fell into complete creative silence for the final third of his earthly life is none other than JeanSibelius, the immortal soul of Finnish music. This profound, prolonged stillness carries a powerfully evocative name in classical music history, known eternally as the silence of Järvenpää. Tonight, accompanied by the softly flickering glow of the hearth, we walk fully into the untold life of this remarkable soul. Through this tranquil tale you need not strive to memorize, we gradually come to understand that this 30-year state of quiet stagnation was never merely a simple drying up of creative inspiration. Instead, it stood as an artist's most heartfelt, tender farewell to his own artistic identity and to the boundless soul of nature itself. Relax your mind and body, allow your spirit to drift along the first gentle breath of wind sweeping through the winter forests of northern Europe. Touch the profound, lonely depth of his inner soul and explore the hidden, surging waves of emotion concealed beneath this seemingly endless outer calm. The subtle crack of fate and artistic struggle had already quietly opened as early as the mid-1920s, by which time JeanSibelius had already established himself as a globally celebrated, towering musical figure. His iconic Finlandia ignited passionate national pride, stirring the soul of every Finnish citizen across the land. His 7 majestic symphonies, universally recognized as the noblest worthy inheritance, carrying forward the grand traditional legacy forged by Beethoven himself. Yet, standing atop the dazzling summit of worldwide acclaim, Sibelius was overcome by an unprecedented, suffocating sense of oppression and inner restlessness. He retreated to his secluded forest home nestled deep within the wilderness of Järvenpää, a humble wooden villa named Ainola, lovingly dedicated to his beloved wife Aino. Here he was meant to begin composing his highly anticipated Eighth Symphony, a work the entire musical scene eagerly awaited. Contractual agreements were signed, financial deposits already paid, publishing houses pressed impatiently for progress, and countless loyal music lovers waited endlessly in hopeful expectation. Yet every time Sibelius seated himself before his broad oak writing desk, staring down at the blank ruled pages of manuscript paper, he felt no surge of overflowing creative inspiration rising within. Instead, he was haunted by an inescapable shadow of fear lingering constantly at his side. He pursued artistic perfection with relentless, uncompromising obsession, believing every previous composition he had crafted had already brushed the hem of divine transcendence. If his Eighth Symphony failed to surpass the magnificent grandeur of all his earlier works, it would amount to an unforgivable sacrilege against his own lifelong musical faith. His writing pen hovered trembling above the empty page, yet he could never bring himself to set ink to paper, the ink slowly drying idle just as the sacred spring of inspiration within his heart withered little by little. Beneath the crushing weight of extreme self-criticism and relentless perfectionism, this was no longer merely the ordinary pain of artistic creation. It evolved into a prolonged psychological prison. The louder and more chaotic the outside world grew, the more Ainola's quiet cottage resembled an isolated, lonely island from which he could never escape. To ease the slow torment of this paralyzing creative deadlock, JeanSibelius turned wholeheartedly to the solace and redemption found within the embrace of nature. He embarked on long daily wandering walks deep into the surrounding forests, choosing not to wear bulky heavy winter garments but dressed in his signature dark formal overcoat, leaning steadily upon a wooden walking stick, leaving deep footprints etched across the untouched snow-covered ground. He once confided to his beloved wife Aino that he could hear the quiet murmuring voices of trees conversing among themselves and listen to the wind weaving intricate fugue melodies through the delicate pine needles. He held a particularly profound lifelong fascination with swans, which in traditional Finnish culture embodied sacred purity, divine revelation and spiritual transcendence. On one unforgettable occasion he witnessed 16 swans flying overhead, arranged in a neat straight horizontal formation. In his private diary he inscribed that this single moment stood as the most deeply moving experience of his entire life, declaring their distant resonant cries to be nothing less than the voice of God singing across the heavens. Yet the deeper he immersed himself into harmonious spiritual unity with nature, the more jarring, shallow and meaningless the noises of the mortal world became in his ears. He grew increasingly weary of glamorous Parisian salons, disdained prestigious lecture platforms in London, and even grew indifferent toward admiring critics who poured endless praise upon his achievements. In his eyes all human language appeared pale and powerless beside the profound silence of nature, every man-crafted musical chord clumsy and awkward compared to the natural melody of swan song echoing across the lake. Sibelius questioned himself painfully within the pages of his diary. If he could never replicate the delicate texture and gentle rhythm of the natural wind, what lasting meaning could his own musical compositions ever truly hold? This extreme standard of aesthetic purity turned him into a spiritual ascetic, guarding an inner treasure trove of golden inspiration, yet refusing to spend even a single trivial note, willingly preferring to endure quiet solitude, financial uncertainty and public doubt rather than deliver a single careless mediocre melody to satisfy the world's impatient expectations. As time drifted onward toward a gloomy, overcast afternoon in 1945, classical music witnessed one of its most heartbreaking, unforgettable moments. Inside his quiet wooden cottage at Järvenpää, JeanSibelius kindled a warm fire within the hearth, moving slowly with unsteady steps toward his bookcase and retrieving a thick stack of heavy manuscript pages. These were the closely guarded drafts of his Eighth Symphony, composed, revised and refined secretly for nearly 20 long years. The sacred masterpiece countless music lovers dreamed of ever hearing performed. Wife Aino stood silently watching from the doorway, choosing not to intervene or speak a word, for she understood fully the inner torment, endless struggle and immense spiritual suffering this unfinished work had inflicted upon her husband. Page by page Sibelius placed every manuscript sheet into the crackling flames, the firelight casting soft shadows across his deeply wrinkled face. Within his profound eyes there lingered no trace of sorrow, grief or regret, only a quiet calm tinged with gentle release. The paper curled, blackened and crumbled away in the blazing heat, gradually turning into fine drifting ashes. Those unheard melodies destined never to grace a concert stage vanished forever into the fireplace embers of Ainola. In that solemn instant the silence of Järvenpää transformed officially from a frustrating creative block into a sacred lifelong spiritual covenant. He buried his own painstaking life work with his own hands and severed the last lingering bond connecting his soul to the restless, impatient modern age. From that day forward the world would never possess a completed Eighth Symphony, only an elderly quiet man listening to the wind whisper through forest trees, and an enduring legendary tale of artistic disappearance. When people later asked about the progress of his long-awaited composition, he would simply gesture silently toward the vast forest stretching beyond his window, replying calmly that the natural sounds dwelling within the woods were already perfect beyond any human musical creation. During the final 10 years of his prolonged silence, Sibelius' physical frame grew increasingly thin and frail, yet his inner spiritual clarity reached its most radiant peak. He no longer troubled himself with worldly fame, reputation or public judgment, nor worried over financial hardship. The generous lifelong stipend granted by the Finnish government allowed him to live out his days with quiet dignity, undisturbed within the peaceful seclusion of the forest. His entire life had been a quiet, relentless struggle balanced between the allure of alcohol, the comfort of tobacco and the weight of prolonged lonely isolation. Yet in his advanced years he regained the pure innocent wonder of a small child. He would spend hours observing the slow crawling movement of a single ant, or sit quietly at dawn listening to the soft rhythmic sound of dewdrops falling gently from leaf branches. He still followed the development of the wider musical world regularly tuning into radio broadcasts to listen to new works composed by younger generations, yet he never offered criticism, commentary or judgment, merely responding with a quiet, gentle smile. This prolonged silence held within it a quiet, compassionate understanding. He saw clearly how human civilization grew increasingly impetuous, superficial and restless amid industrial progress and the chaos of global warfare, choosing instead to retreat willingly into the primal, orderly rhythm of nature. His loving relationship with wife Ano deepened into the tranquil stillness of quiet waters running beneath the surface. They rarely needed spoken conversation content, simply to sit side by side upon the porch watching the evening sunset dye the quiet lake surface in rich shades of crimson and gold. For him life itself had evolved into the grandest symphony of all, and he alone stood as its sole appreciative audience. He no longer craved the applause and admiration of the outside world, for he had already found an eternal spiritual frequency deep within this secluded quiet corner, a place where his soul could rest peacefully undisturbed. When the early autumn arrived in 1957 and the last migrating flock of swans soared silently over the skies of Jarvanpaa, he understood clearly that his own final curtain call had finally drawn near. JeanSibelius passed away peacefully at the advanced age of 91. His state funeral held amid nationwide moment of silence across the whole of Finland. Returning to the lingering question raised in the prologue, why did he choose to embrace 30 years of complete artistic silence at the very height of his creative powers? Perhaps his prolonged withdrawal was never caused by a loss of natural talent or fading inspiration. Instead, he discovered something far more elevated, eternal and profound than musical composition itself. Through 30 years of unbroken stillness, he taught the restless modern world that having the courage to embrace quiet solitude amid universal noise and chaos demands far greater inner strength than creating art itself. The manuscripts he burned with his own hands have long since transformed into every rustling leaf and every drifting snowflake scattered throughout the forests of Ainola. Whenever you listen to the familiar strains of Finlandia or the haunting, graceful valse triste, pause for a moment between the flowing melodies and grasp the quiet, resilient power hidden within his deliberate silence. The gentle tale of JeanSibelius now draws to its quiet close. The world outside your window sinks into soft night, just like the snow-draped forests of Jarvanpaa. Carry this profound Nordic tranquility within your heart. Drift slowly into peaceful slumber and listen to the quiet natural rhythm, belonging only to your own inner soul. Here there is no restless anxiety, no worldly expectation, only everlasting unchanging serenity. Good night and sweet dreams.